Hi, this is just a really quick overview of vulnerability and control analysis in security risk management. So not about feeling vulnerable or having a sense of control, loss of control, just in the security risk management space. It's evolved from some of the work we did when we developed the security risk management body of knowledge. And this is a little excerpt from a webinar that my colleague and I, Conrad Brzezinski from Sectara, are going to be running tomorrow. That's Thursday at 5:30 Sydney time. So I hope you can come along for that, but if you can't, here's a little taste of a few tips which might help you think about your vulnerabilities and look at how accurate your assessment is at the moment. So, the webinar, as I said, 5:30 on Thursday, come along. Well, now here's what controls when we think about them are these ideas between a threat and a vulnerability and an asset, and the criticality of the asset is what determines how significant the controls need to be, how vulnerable you are, and what's going on there. There's a lot in that. There's intent and capability forms part of the threat. They're the two elements traditionally considered to evaluate threat or to give you information about it. There's a few layers below that which you can go into, which we covered in the security risk management body of knowledge. In vulnerability, we also spoke about the asset itself, how vulnerable is it and how exposed is it. So, if you travel more frequently, you are more exposed. If you have a production server network which is also connected to the internet and has web pages which are accessible, it's going to be more exposed than a production system which is offline somewhere. And the criticality of the asset or the resource that you're thinking about in terms of consequences and the impact on objectives. So this is the threat pathway that we're looking at very quickly. I won't go into this. You can pause this and read this anytime you want, but vulnerability is pretty much what we all think it is. How easy it is to take down. Your front door might be very solid, but if you've got a window that's made of glass with no lock on it, there's a vulnerability there. So one of the tools that I've used, and this is worth thinking about, is how you're going to consistently identify vulnerability. So CAVE is one of these tools, and the C stands for the cause. So what are the two causes? The immediate cause, and what's the underlying root cause of this? And then we're talking about the asset, or if we were talking about ISO 31000, the word resources. So resources and asset you'll find depending on where you're looking. But let's just call it an asset. What is it that could be vulnerable, and what's the vector? What's the attack vector? The bad guy's going to come in through the front door. They're going to come in through a phishing attack. Are they come in through the back gate that's left open? What vector is it? And what event? What are they going to do? Is it going to be a phishing attack or a brute force attack or denial of service, or is it going to be an armed assault at the front gate? So if you think about these four elements, then basically in a single sentence or a paragraph, you can consistently, this is the key, consistently and defensively identify a vulnerability. To simply say the internet is a vulnerability or the front gate is a vulnerability doesn't give you any meaningful information that you can work with, because it's quite different depending whether the front gate is someone who's going to pick the lock or someone who's going to run through it with a truck. So your vulnerability could be quite different in each scenario. It could be a 30-ton gate with a $2 lock on it, so the vulnerability is not going to be the same. Now, just the heads up, my neighbour's house isn't really that easy to rob, but if you were looking to go somewhere and you wanted to break in, you might think about night latches, and I'll let you read this, just pause it at any time, but you get the idea of how we could describe it, and I'll go into more detail with some cybersecurity examples and with some physical security examples. We'll also talk about criteria for controls. The last time I went to buy a mountain bike, the guy in the shop said, we build three kinds of mountain bikes here. We build them strong, lightweight and cheap. You get to choose any two. And that's pretty much the same with security. But in all seriousness, there are three elements of controls, and they are, when you look at the control, what's the policy or the legislation or the framework or the procedure or the documentation like? Is it a robust policy or solution? Is there an assurance? So are staff trained? It's no good having the best policy in the world, but if you don't train staff, you've got no assurance that anybody's applying it. And if there's no compliance in the form of audits or perhaps disciplinary action or just simple self-assessments, then you could have a great policy for safety management or for locks on doors. You might even have assurance that everyone's trained in how to use the key in that lock. But if nobody actually goes around to check if the locks are still working or if the policy is being updated and all these sort of things, it's not a solid control. So they're the three criteria. And unlike mountain bikes, you not only get to choose all three, but you must have all three. So that's policy, assurance, and compliance. So again, I'll let you read this. This example of describing a control is based around this 5C and PAC model that I'll go into much more in the webinar tomorrow. So hopefully it's interesting, and you'll find it. I'll make the webinar available with some free downloads and the video of it later, but if you can get there live, you can ask questions and see it in a bit more detail. There's free stuff at the end of it. Every good webinar should be free, and it should have free stuff. So there's going to be a cheat sheet for how to describe vulnerabilities and controls, a free copy of this presentation, a copy of the Security Risk Management Aid Memoir that you can download, and a free piece of software for security risk assessments. I know it's a pretty good deal if you ask me, and you'll get the 30 years of experience, which has been growing in probably 60 years between Conrad and I. But get in quick, because with every year I realise that I know much less as a percentage of what I'd like to know. So the world is changing fast, but this is a very principles-driven webinar. In the first half, I'll talk about the principles, the techniques, some of the tools and approaches to be consistent and to be really defensible. And we're just going to focus on vulnerabilities and controls. There's a whole world of stuff which we can't cover in a single webinar, but more will come, other webinars. So sign up for this one, even if you don't get to this one. If you sign up, I'll keep you posted about other ones. So that's it for the highlights of it. I hope these cheat sheets, the cave example and that example of how to document them, is useful. And so just click on the link below and you'll be able to get through and register this webinar and find out more. So thank you very much. And without further ado, au revoir. See you there.